The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning. We appreciate you being here today. Before we start the webinar, just wanted to give a little housekeeping information to you. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to use the control panel and you can either put your question in the chat or the Q&A. And just to let you know, if we're not able to get to your question during the presentation, we have reserved some time at the end for question and answer session as well. So I think, Shion, we don't want to waste anyone's time. We want to be respectful. So I think we could go ahead and let's go ahead and get started. Welcome this morning. We appreciate you joining us for this presentation on preparing financially for natural disasters. This is a joint presentation with Shion Corley, the Consumer Assistance Supervisor with the Texas Department of Banking, and Patricia Horde, the Grant Education and Communications Specialist with the Texas Office of Consumer Credit Commissioner. Please note, this presentation is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice.
Thank you for the introduction, Patricia. Again, my name is Shion Corley. I'm with the Texas Department of Banking. And just to give a quick overview of the Texas Department of Banking, what we do, we regulate the Texas State Chartered Banks and Holding Companies, as well as trust companies. We oversee foreign banks and representative offices, money service businesses. So that would be like PayPal, MoneyGram, Western Union, Meta, Facebook payments, perpetual care cemeteries, prepaid funeral contracts, check verification entities, and if anyone have any questions, concerns, or comments regarding the entities that I just mentioned, you can contact us at the toll-free number that is listed on your screen.
Thank you, Shion. And let me give you a little overview of the Texas Office of Consumer Credit Commissioner, or OCCC, as we say, since it's a little shorter. We seek to provide a fair, lawful, and healthy credit environment to Texans by licensing and regulating certain non-depository institutions, such as pawn shops and payday loan lenders, by educating consumers and creditors about their rights and responsibilities, by protecting and safeguarding consumers against abusive and deceptive lending practices, and we also have a consumer assistance helpline should you need to contact us. Our objectives for this presentation today are that by the end, you will be able to understand your risks as they relate to preparing financially for natural disasters, and you'll be able to develop a plan, take action, and avoid scams. All right, we like to start off with a polling question. So Shion, if you would launch the poll, I would appreciate it. And the question for you all is, how many disasters were declared in Texas over the past 10 years? And as you're answering that, Shion, I don't know about you, but when I think about disasters, I think about things like tornadoes and hurricanes. What typically comes to mind when you think about disasters?
For me, it is definitely tornadoes. We live in Central Texas with, the Great Tornado Alley, and then hurricanes. So right now, I think we're in both seasons, tornado and hurricanes. So those are the two disasters that I think of.
All right. Well, let's see what everyone says. How many disasters were declared in Texas over the past 10 years? And let's see. Okay, so 0 to 15, 16 to 30, greater than 45, so 38%. Well, actually, for the winner is, Shion, if you could move on to the next slide, the one that no one chose actually is the answer, because over the last 10 years, there were 39 official disaster declarations in the state of Texas. And actually, according to FEMA, Texas has, we're Texas, so we have to do everything big. We actually have more disaster declarations than any other state. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of things on this slide here. You can see the numbers in relation to the different types of disasters. And I read that with a wildfire, that wildfires actually can travel 1 mile in 3 minutes. So you want to keep things like that in mind if you hear about a wildfire. And then floods. According to FEMA, the flooding actually causes the most damage of any type of natural disaster. In fact, on average, flooding costs over $5 billion, and that's billion with a B, $5 billion worth of damage on average across the United States in a year. So interesting data. And you don't expect to see winter storms and severe ice storm declarations in Texas, but after the past few years, we get that too. So, all right, next slide, please.
So let's,
sorry, go ahead.
So let's talk about understanding your risk. There are 4 major points that we really, want to talk about, which is the hazards that could impact your area. We were talking earlier about the disasters that come to mind when we think about, like what could affect us. Those disasters or hazards could actually be like the tornadoes in this area, drought. Some people may not think of that being a natural disaster, but for the state of Texas, it definitely is, and hurricanes, which disasters call for evacuation or a shelter in place. And there is a difference between the two. The evacuation is when you actually have to leave your place of dwelling. In the shelter in place, such as with a tornado, you would actually need to find a safe place in your home. And what or how might the disasters affect your finances? So those things you have to think about, like if things are destroyed, like do you have the proper coverages in place for insurance to cover those damages, or do you have like any extra cash on hand in the case of an emergency, and what resources are available for staying informed? So as I said, the hazards that could affect your area would be, hurricanes, flood, wildfire. I think Texas was hit with a wildfire up in the Lubbock area. Tornadoes, we know for sure. But there's also the unpredictable incidents, such as a chemical spill or an explosion. And a lot of times we see those type of things happening in the southeast part of Texas. And also, we want to keep everyone informed of all the different possible disasters that could happen. So that includes children. If there are any educators that joined us today, you could go to texasready.gov's website and you can print out this emergency preparedness activity book to share with your students. The goal is to educate them about the different disasters that could affect their area where they live, but we don't want them to be afraid. We just want them to be prepared and stay safe. So the evacuation or the shelter in place, you want to make sure that you're using common sense and have information that is available to you. Plan ahead if possible. A lot of times we get a lot of weather alerts for any upcoming weather events. Make sure that you plan if you need to evacuate or you plan to evacuate. Make sure that you know where all the gas stations are. Any grocery shopping that you may have to purchase. The with the gas, I will definitely say to watch out for like price gouging. That has an impact. Here in Texas, you can definitely contact the Texas office of the Attorney General to file complaints when you see different stores or gas stations that have inflated their prices. They should not be inflating their prices in the case of an emergency. Know where to go and or how to stay, and most importantly, stay informed. So here are some resources to help you stay informed: the local TV news or your radio station, weather apps. Weather apps are very popular. I know a lot of people, they just put like the little weather widget on their phone, but that is just like a little small part of it. You can actually go into the app and see like all the different warnings and like pending weather that may be coming our way. And of course, the FEMA mobile app. So if you see the illustration on the screen, the weather app, I'm sorry, the FEMA mobile app, it gives tips on surviving the natural disasters. You can customize your emergency checklist, which we will talk about later. Receive alerts from the National Weather Service. You can locate open shelters and disaster recovery centers, as well as upload and share your disaster photos, which could definitely come in handy if you need FEMA assistance or you need to provide information to your insurance company. And then, of course, they connected with social media and the FEMA blog.
Thank you, Shion. So let's talk now a little bit about the different types of notifications when there's a disaster. It's important to know the difference. So we have advisories, watches, and warnings. An advisory is when the weather conditions are likely to occur, and this is for instances where it's not as dramatic or severe of weather like. It might be an advisory for frost or wind advisory. The next step up is a watch, and this is when the specific weather condition is possible. It's usually for a larger area and a longer period of time. And then the highest step is a warning, and this is when you really want to take notice and probably take action because the weather conditions are occurring or they're imminent. It's usually over a smaller area and for a definite period of time. Disasters can affect your finances in several ways, so let's talk about that. So first of all, you could have a loss of income due to the disaster, depending on your place of employment and the disaster. Perhaps there's a tornado, for example. Your place of business might no longer be operational, so that's something to keep in mind. You might have to have extra costs in regards to meeting essential needs if you need to evacuate. The expense of, traveling, the expense of paying for groceries. You may have just gone grocery shopping, but if you have to evacuate, you're not going to have those supplies anymore. You may have to pay for repairs or replacement of items. If, for example, I have a friend who was impacted by the tornadoes recently, and he is in the middle of replacing windows and having his roof repaired. Those are expenses that we aren't necessarily typically planning for. You may have limited access to financial resources. Oftentimes during disasters, unfortunately, our utilities aren't working. You can't just run down to the ATM, for example, or you may not be able to access your financial institution's app, what have you. And then keep in mind, if you have missing payments or late payments, even though there's a natural disaster, you could have penalties. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. All right, we have another polling question. And by the way, we really appreciate y'all participating with the polling questions. It makes it more fun for us to be a little interactive. So my question for you is, in case of an emergency, can you quickly access your important financial information and documents? So your answer choices are yes, I know exactly where everything is and how to get it. Maybe I could access at least some of it quickly, or no, it would take some time to get that information. And Shion, I don't know about you, but I'm right now I'm between maybe and yes, because honestly, after doing the research for this presentation, I realized I was at no, and that's not where I want to be. I really am. I wanted to have my information and documents more readily accessible. So I'm in the process of that. How about you, Shion?
Well, I would definitely say for the most part, yes. My husband, he's been in the insurance industry for a little over 2 decades. So just making sure that we have, our documents and, have everything in our safe. In the case of an emergency, we're there. We're there. Not 100%, but we're probably in a better, position than others.
Good for you. All right, let's see what our attendees had to say. All right. Wow. So 67% said yes, 33% are at the maybe point, and nobody said no. That's great. Well, good for y'all. Pat yourselves on the back. All right, let's move on with the next slide, please. That's really impressive. I'm super excited that folks are so prepared already. So just wanted to throw a little quote in there from Richard Cushing. When you're thinking about planning ahead, just remember it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. So planning ahead can really pay off.
So let's talk about developing a plan. And there are actually 4 reasons why you want to develop a plan. The first one is to protect your people. You want to make sure that one that can be, financially sound and definitely safe in the event of a natural disaster. That also goes for protecting your pets, pet insurance, and just making sure, maybe like a chip. Those will be a couple of things we'll talk about in just a minute. Protecting your property and protecting your privacy. So, with protecting your people, you want to make sure that you compile their personal information. If they're your household member, of course, consider the medical information and prescriptions. That does not include like the medical power of attorney. That should actually already be on file with your doctor's office. Make sure that you have the provisions for any elderly or disabled loved ones that are in your household. And that would actually include a copy of a POA that may be on file with your financial institution. If you don't have one or you need to get one to them, definitely contact your financial institution to discuss that information as far as a POA is concerned. Develop the communication and meeting plans. A lot of people live in 2-story homes or multi-family homes. You want to make sure that you have effective communication in the event that something happens and a safe meeting place for everyone once they have reached safety. And of course, build a list of necessary documents. Those documents can actually be found on a website called ready.gov that is actually powered by FEMA. And just a little bit more about ready.gov, they have an emergency financial aid kit that also has tips for preparing for your home and other resources. So, in the illustrations that you see on the screen, the first one is the build a kit, just making sure that you have enough food, water, medical supplies for your needs for at least 72 hours. Some people go beyond that, and that's totally fine if you know that the natural disaster or the disaster affecting your area is going to be longer than 3 days. And then the defensible space fire zones. It's funny, I actually thought that this was showing like where you could actually how far you need to be away from your home, but that's not it. It is showing like how far your trees, if you have trees or shrubbery, how far it should be away from your home for to prevent a fire. As you can see, there's a little stack of firewood that's about 15 to 30 feet away from the home. And so with that emergency kit, the emergency financial aid kit, it actually includes checklist forms, which would be like the household contracts, identification, and other information, your financial and legal documents, and your financial account info. And then it also provides other preparation steps for like the community preparedness activities. So if you have a HOA, you go to the meetings, you can provide that information. Tips for employers and business owners in the in the event that their business is affected by the natural disaster. And then, of course, learning CPR and first aid skills. And just so that you know that the checklist and the forms that they are provided on that website is also the same information that you would provide to FEMA in the event that you would need it for a natural disaster. And for CPR, here in Texas, a certification is good for 2 years, and after that, you would have to renew it.
Thank you, Shion. So
Welcome.
let's talk about protecting your pets a little bit. Shion mentioned having, the emergency kit and having food and water for your people. Make sure you're considering that for your pets. And if you have, say, a small dog or cat, you might need some sort of kennel or a way to transport them in the case of an emergency. If you have larger pets, like a horse, for example, it's important to make arrangements ahead of time. So let's say you live along the coast in an area that's susceptible to hurricanes. Might be a good idea to talk to someone, a friend or family member up in Central Texas around the Austin area, and who would be willing and able to board your pet for a short time in the case of an emergency. You also might consider microchipping your pet. I know with the 4th of July coming up, you always hear about all the animals in the shelter after the fireworks on the 4th of July. I can imagine just how much that's amplified after a natural disaster. So microchipping might be an option for you as well. Now let's talk about protecting your property. It's a really great idea to make a written inventory and a video tour of your home. As Shion mentioned, her husband's been in the insurance industry for quite a while, and I imagine having that kind of an inventory would make it significantly easier on the claim side if you have to file a claim after a disaster. And quite frankly, after a disaster, I would imagine the stress and anxiety of trying to remember what exactly you had in every room of your home would be quite a challenge. Be sure you update that information on a regular basis. Might be a good idea to add that to your calendar as, maybe do that at tax time every year or at daylight savings time when you replace those batteries in your smoke detector. So here are some key accounts that you are going to want to list. As Shion mentioned, if you use that emergency financial preparedness kit from FEMA, they will walk you through, what information you need. It's a very helpful, self-explanatory form. And as she mentioned, if you just fill out the first couple of sections, that actually includes all the information you would need if you needed to file for assistance through FEMA. So keep in mind, I'm sorry, go back to that slide, please, Sean. Keep in mind, information that you want to have would be in regards to your housing payments and other financial obligations, for example, auto loans or other credit cards, debts you have, your financial account information, your checking, savings, and retirement account information, insurance policies, your homeowners or renters policies, your life or flood policies, all of those, your sources of income. It would be, you want to make sure you have information about where that comes from in case it's stopped or needs to be, if you've been evacuated, you want to contact them and give them updated information so you can still receive that money. And then tax and estate planning documents. Next slide, please.
So let's talk about the different types of insurance that are available. You have your homeowners and or your renters insurance for those that live in dwellings that they do not own. Automobile, disability, which includes long-term and short-term. Life insurance, whether it's whole or universal. Flood insurance and umbrella insurance or umbrella policy. And just to go over a little bit more about the umbrella insurance, because I didn't know it existed until my spouse actually started working in the industry. It offers a supplemental personal liability coverage beyond your standard homeowners, your auto, or your watercraft insurance policies. It protects against claims and for injury and property damage to others. However, it does not provide protection against business-related liabilities. So, for instance, let's say you have a pool at your home and someone becomes injured at your house, and your homeowner's insurance is going to cover the injury. However, the party decides that they want to sue you. This is where the umbrella insurance would go into effect to take care of any payments that may come out of that lawsuit if that other party was to win. And for flood insurance, I know like right now there are a lot of different counties here in the state of Texas that are actually reviewing their 100-year flood plain policies, the coverage, and because they have changed, and a lot of that has been because of like the different weather that we have experienced. The terrain of our great state has changed. And just to know that, 1 foot of water can cause up to $25,000 worth of damage, according to FEMA. Homeowner policies typically do not cover damage from flooding. And most flood policies, they have a 30-day waiting period before they take effect. So if there's someone that is interested in getting a flood policy, it is recommended that you at least get it at least 6 months in advance before your area start to experience like certain weather. So, like for us, we know that this is tornado season and hurricane season is upon us. So, you know, for those that were interested in flood insurance, they probably would have um, purchased a policy back in, January. But if anyone has more information regarding flood insurance, you can always contact the Texas Department of Insurance at the website that is listed on the screen. And so now we're up to another polling question.
We like these. All right, this one's a true-false question. So, true or false? Financial obligations such as your mortgage or rent payments, utilities, etc., are automatically suspended when disaster strikes. True or false? I like this question. I think this is an important question. So it would be interesting to see. So Shion, whenever you're ready, you can post the results.
Okay.
Good. We've got a smart crowd on here today. Awesome. You know what? That's correct. Now, some organizations may post something on their website if they know there's a disaster in a particular area. For example, a mortgage company might post something on their website that says, hey, if you've been impacted by the hurricane, for example, please contact us, etc. Now, something you want to keep in mind is while some companies, some creditors may offer a forbearance and say, okay, you don't have to make payments for 3 months or what have you, make sure that you are aware of what's in that agreement, because unfortunately sometimes consumers accept the forbearance believing that those payments will be tacked on to the end of the note when actually those payments come due at the end of the forbearance period. So at the end of the 3 months, they're surprised in a bad way with those payments that they were expecting to pay significantly later. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on with the rest of the presentation. So another key part of preparing financially for natural disasters is establishing an emergency savings fund. Well, why should you do that? Well, as I mentioned before, we're talking about my friend up in Temple, you might have to repair or replace property. You might have a travel emergency. If you're evacuated for a hurricane or some other reason, wildfire, you may have travel expenses, hotels, food that you weren't planning for. So having that emergency savings fund could be really helpful. You may have an unexpected loss of income, so keep that in mind. How do you start an emergency savings fund if you've never done that before? I have a feeling this group probably already has that on the way, but in case you have friends or family members that you want to talk to, or if we have a handful of folks who haven't already started this, start off by setting a realistic goal. And a realistic goal for you may be different than a realistic goal for me. So it might be that a realistic goal is I'm going to save $500 in my emergency fund by the end of the year, or maybe a realistic goal is I'm going to save $2,500 in my emergency fund by the end of the year. Just make sure you're contributing to that regularly, and define what constitutes an emergency before one happens. And if you are sharing that emergency savings fund with someone else, make sure you're having that conversation with that other person so that you decide beforehand that, you know, wanting to go out to eat does not constitute an emergency, but having to be evacuated and pay for hotels, etc., that does. So plan ahead. Just here's some tips to help you on that. Next slide, please. Stash some cash. We're talking about emergency savings, and sometimes cash might be the only option after a disaster. So think about how much cash you might need, store it in a safe place. And something to keep in mind is if you have disaster-related expenses, keep those receipts, because sometimes your insurance company might reimburse you for disaster-related expenses. If you're keeping your emergency cash at home, make sure you invest in a good fireproof home safe. Think about the temperature rating, the time rating, is it waterproof? Do a little research before you invest in that. Get creative with your hideaways. Don't just take your money under your mattress, and spread your cash out so that you can minimize your risk. Think about balancing accessibility with security. So what that really means is, yes, it's a good idea to have some cash on hand at my house that I can quickly get in the case of an emergency, but I probably don't want to keep all my money at my house. I probably want to have some at a financial institution where it's a little safer. So you just want to balance accessibility with security. Next slide, please. Okay, with every presentation that we have, go back one, please. With every presentation that we have, we talk about disaster scams because we want to make sure we help you avoid those. And unfortunately, during disasters, the scammers come out. Oftentimes, there are scams related to charitable solicitations. People will ask for donations, but it's really a scam. You can go to websites like charitynavigator.org and do a little research to make sure it's a valid charity. Watch out for rental listings, and honestly, anymore, it's not just rentals, it's home purchases. People will list them as if they own the property, and they don't. Those are scams. Watch out for vendor scams and price gouging, as Shio mentioned, in regards to things like fuel prices, etc. Beware of insurance fraud and forgery. You know, those checks from FEMA, unfortunately, sometimes the bad actors will get those and forge people's names and try and run off with the money. Next slide, please. So a disaster scam is defined as a deliberate act to defraud individuals or the government after catastrophe. So keep in mind that here's some things that can help you avoid these. So be aware of unusual payment requests. If you have a contractor, for example, coming in to repair your home after a disaster, and they're asking for a large chunk of the total bill up front before they even begin the work, that's a big red flag. Make sure you get all of your agreements in writing. Be careful to protect yourself against identity theft. And the way you can do that is don't give out your bank account information, your credit card information. Don't give away your personal financial information to anyone. Research those contractors, get referrals if you can, and federal workers do not ever solicit or accept money. So if someone says they're a federal worker and they're soliciting or accepting money from you, it's a scam, and report it. Next slide, please. The scammers are targeting a specific group, and according to the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, if you're familiar with them, scammers in regards to natural disasters are actually targeting college-educated folks who are optimistic, consider themselves to be self-reliant, higher income earners who consider themselves financially informed, and have recently been impacted by health or financial changes. And let's face it, if you've experienced a hazard or natural disaster, your finances have probably been pretty well impacted. And so just always, always be aware and on guard for scammers.
So if you have been victimized, you can contact the Texas Office of the Attorney General. They handle a lot of consumer issues that are financial institution related. You can report online fraud to the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is the ic3.gov. You can report suspected disaster-related fraud to the National Center for Disaster Fraud, which is ran by the Department of Justice. You can also file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission at ftc.gov. And just to give you a little bit of background as far as the Federal Trade Commission, when people file complaints with them, they only really look at the ones that they have like a large scale of complaints against. They don't investigate every individual complaint that comes through. They actually have a disclaimer on their website. So if someone does decide to file a complaint from the Federal Trade Commission and you do not hear back from them or any type of response, that could probably be why because they have not seen a pattern of the particular complaint that the person has provided to them. And then, of course, as always, we encourage consumers to actually check their credit often. You can check it weekly at annualcredit.com. And so today, our key takeaway, or we have actually two, is taking the financial precautions before a disaster strikes. It can help you save time, money, and stress. And of course, visit ready.gov for resources to help you prepare. And now we are actually open for any questions that anyone may have.
And as a reminder, if you would like a copy of the slides, you can download those from the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. And we appreciate y'all being here with us today. Do we have any questions in the Q&A or in the chat, Sheila?
We do not. And with that, we would like to thank you for attending today's webinar. And if you have a request for a presentation for your business or organization, you can always email either Patricia or I at financialeducation@occcctexas.gov or financialeducation@dob.texas.gov. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Please be prepared and be safe.